December 7th, 1941, 7:55 a.m. The sun had already risen over Hawaii. The waters of Pearl Harbor were calm. A light breeze moved across the harbor. For the thousands of American sailors stationed there, it seemed like just another Sunday morning. Some were lining up for breakfast, some were writing letters home, others were still asleep in their bunks. A few were making plans for the afternoon. No one expected history to arrive that morning, and certainly not from the sky. Far to the north of Hawaii, beyond the horizon, hundreds of Japanese aircraft were already racing toward the island. Their mission was simple: destroy America's Pacific Fleet, cripple the United States before it could enter the war. Within the next 110 minutes, battleships would burn, aircraft would explode, and thousands of Americans would be killed. By the end of the morning, the United States would be a different nation. This is the story of Pearl Harbor, the 110 minutes that dragged America into World War II. By late 1941, war was already consuming much of the planet. In Europe, Hitler had conquered country after country. Across Asia, Japan was building an empire of its own. Japanese forces had invaded China and occupied vast territories across East Asia. But empire came with a cost. Japan needed enormous amounts of oil, steel, and raw materials. Without those resources, its military machine could not continue expanding. The problem was that much of Japan's oil came from the United States. As Japanese aggression increased, America responded with economic sanctions. Then came the oil embargo. To Japanese leaders, it felt like a ticking clock had started. They believed they faced a choice: either abandon their ambitions or strike before America could stop them. They chose war, and their target would be Pearl Harbor. The architect of the attack was Admiral Yamamoto. Yamamoto understood America better than most Japanese leaders. He had lived in the United States. He had studied American industry. He knew that if a long war began, America's factories would eventually outproduce Japan many times over. Japan could not afford a prolonged conflict, so Yamamoto proposed a gamble: a surprise attack so devastating that America would be unable to respond immediately. The target was the U.S. Pacific Fleet stationed at Pearl Harbor. If Japan could destroy the fleet in a single morning, it would gain precious time to secure its empire across the Pacific. The plan was incredibly risky, but Japanese leaders approved it. On November 26, 1941, a powerful Japanese task force slipped out into the Pacific Ocean. 6 aircraft carriers, hundreds of aircraft, thousands of sailors. It was one of the most powerful naval strike forces ever assembled. The fleet sailed through remote northern waters. Radio silence was absolute: no transmissions, no signals, no mistakes. Day after day, the ships moved eastward through rough seas. Meanwhile, life at Pearl Harbor continued normally. American intelligence knew tensions with Japan were rising. War seemed possible, but few imagined that Hawaii would be the first target. The Americans were looking west. The danger was coming from the north. On the morning of December 7th, a radar station on Oahu detected a large group of aircraft approaching the island. The operators were surprised. The formation appeared enormous. They reported the sighting, but the warning was dismissed. American officers believed the aircraft were expected American bombers arriving from the mainland. No alarm was sounded. The opportunity to prepare was lost. The Japanese attack force continued toward Pearl Harbor, undetected, unchallenged. Then at 7:48 a.m., aircraft appeared over the harbor. Many Americans looked up in confusion. Then they saw the markings, the red rising sun of Japan. Moments later, bombs began falling. The peaceful Sunday morning vanished instantly. The harbor erupted into chaos. Dive bombers screamed from the sky. Torpedo bombers raced just above the water. Machine gun fire ripped across airfields and ships. Explosions echoed across Oahu. Within seconds, men were running for cover. Others rushed toward battle stations. Many sailors had been caught completely by surprise. Some had not even had time to put on their uniforms. Pearl Harbor was under attack. The primary targets were the American battleships anchored along Battleship Row. Japanese torpedo bombers attacked with deadly precision. One ship after another was struck. Massive columns of water erupted beside the vessels. Steel hulls were ripped open. Ships began taking on water almost immediately. For years, battleships had been considered the kings of naval warfare. Now they were trapped, unable to maneuver, unable to escape, perfect targets. Across the harbor, sailors desperately fought back. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire, machine guns rattled. But the attack had achieved complete surprise. The defenders were reacting. The attackers were executing a carefully rehearsed plan. Then came the moment that would define the attack forever. The battleship USS Arizona sat anchored along Battleship Row. Hundreds of sailors were aboard. Some were preparing for morning duties, others were still trying to understand what was happening. At 8:06 a.m., a Japanese armor-piercing bomb struck the ship. The bomb penetrated deep into the vessel, then it reached the forward ammunition magazines. What happened next lasted only seconds. A massive explosion tore through the ship. A giant fireball erupted into the sky. The blast shattered steel. It hurled debris across the harbor. Men vanished instantly. For many aboard the Arizona, there was no chance to escape. More than 1,100 sailors and Marines were killed. Nearly half of all American deaths that day occurred on this single ship. The Arizona became both a grave and a symbol of the shock, destruction, and sacrifice of Pearl Harbor. As the attack continued, stories of extraordinary bravery emerged. Sailors entered burning compartments to rescue trapped shipmates. Medical personnel treated wounded men while bombs continued to fall. Crew members fought fires that seemed impossible to control. Some men abandoned safety to help others. Many never returned. Throughout the harbor, acts of courage unfolded every minute, not because the defenders expected to become heroes, but because in moments of crisis, ordinary people often do extraordinary things. While battleships were being attacked, Japanese aircraft struck American airfields. Their goal was simple: destroy American aircraft before they could take off. The strategy worked. Rows of American planes parked wingtip to wingtip became easy targets. Bombs exploded across runways. Hangars burned. Aircraft were destroyed where they stood. Black smoke began covering large sections of the island. Yet despite the devastation, a handful of American pilots managed to get airborne. Outnumbered and surprised, they fought back against overwhelming odds. Their efforts could not stop the attack, but they demonstrated that resistance was growing. Just when defenders thought the worst might be over, another wave of Japanese aircraft appeared. The second attack focused on military facilities, airfields, and damaged ships. Fresh explosions shook the harbor. Smoke darkened the sky. The smell of burning fuel spread across the island. Oil leaking from damaged ships ignited on the water. For sailors forced to abandon ship, survival became a terrifying challenge. Some found themselves swimming through burning fuel. Others searched desperately for missing friends and shipmates. The harbor had become a scene of destruction unlike anything America had experienced in generations. Then, almost as suddenly as it had begun, the attack ended. The Japanese aircraft turned north and disappeared. The skies grew quieter, but Pearl Harbor was unrecognizable. Ships burned across the harbor. Aircraft wreckage littered airfields. Smoke rose thousands of feet into the sky. The water was covered with oil and debris. Everywhere rescue efforts began. The wounded were carried to medical stations. Survivors searched for friends. Families waited for news. Many would never receive the answers they hoped for. The final numbers were staggering. More than 2,400 Americans killed. Over 1,000 wounded, 8 battleships damaged or sunk, hundreds of aircraft destroyed. As news spread across the country, Americans gathered around radios. The reports seemed almost unbelievable. How could such a devastating attack happen on American soil? For years, many Americans had hoped to avoid becoming involved in the growing global conflict. That hope disappeared on December the 7th. Shock quickly turned into anger, and anger turned into determination. The following day, Americans waited for a response. On December 8th, President Franklin D. Roosevelt entered the Chamber of Congress. The nation listened. Roosevelt's speech lasted only a few minutes, but one sentence would become immortal. December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The words electrified the country. Congress declared war on Japan. The vote was nearly unanimous. The United States was now officially at war. Within days, the conflict expanded even further. America had entered World War II. From a military perspective, the attack had been a remarkable success. The Pacific Fleet had suffered enormous damage, but Japan had failed to achieve its most important objective. America's aircraft carriers were not in Pearl Harbor. They survived. Even more importantly, America's industrial capacity remained untouched. Factories soon began producing ships, tanks, aircraft, and weapons on a scale the world had never seen. Millions volunteered for military service. The attack that was supposed to weaken American resolve had done the opposite. It united the nation. Pearl Harbor awakened a sleeping giant. Today, visitors from around the world travel to Pearl Harbor. Many come to see the memorial built above the wreck of the USS Arizona. Beneath the water, the battleship still rests where it sank, and even now, tiny drops of oil continue to rise from the wreck. Sailors sometimes call them the tears of the Arizona, a reminder that the story is not just about ships or strategy. It is about people. Young men who expected an ordinary Sunday morning, families whose lives changed forever, and a nation that found itself suddenly at war. The attack lasted only 110 minutes, less time than a football game, less time than a movie. Yet those 110 minutes altered the course of history. They transformed the United States, they reshaped World War II, and they changed the world forever. December 7, 1941, the morning America went to war,